Okay, so the last thing that this lesson deals with is minus signs and negative exponents. So I have 6 different statements here, and we need to keep in mind each one has a different value, or is calculated differently, I should say. So if we look at the very first one, it says 4 squared. So they're just asking you what is 4 times 4, and your answer is 16. Now I can tell you right now, some of you are going to make a mistake and you're going to accidentally tell me it's 8, but make sure we recognize that it is 4 times 4, so that has a value of 16. Now the next one has a negative sign in front of it. What this problem is, how this problem is actually read, is it is the opposite of 4 squared. So one thing that they tell you to do sometimes is if that is not in parentheses, you cover it up and you say 4 squared is 16, and then you have that negative sign in front. It is the opposite of 4 squared. It means the opposite of 4 times 4. The base that is being raised to that exponent is just 4. We also have, let me back up and come back up here, we have 4 to the negative 2. So the difference between 4 squared and 4 to the negative 2 is not that your value is negative 16, but that negative exponent means that you are going to take the reciprocal, or when you move from numerator to denominator, you change the sign of the exponent. So your answer ends up being 1/16. So the difference between the base of 4 being raised to the second or to the negative second is that your answers are reciprocals of each other. Normally the way that I like to work through these is I go, what is 4 squared? 16. And then I go, oh, a negative sign, so I got to flip it, 1/16. Some people prefer to move it to the denominator and make it a positive exponent and then calculate it. All right, so I told you what this opposite of 4 squared meant. This other one, the difference between the next 2 problems in the middle row is that in the second one you have parentheses around that negative 4. So what that means is you have negative 4 as a base, and that is squared, so you are taking it times itself. Now negative 4 times negative 4 is positive 16. So the difference is, are you taking the opposite of 4 times 4, or are you taking negative 4 times negative 4? Because it will make a difference in the sign of your answer. Now finally, the last 2 provide us examples of combinations of the top 2. So as I look at the first one, the base that is being raised to that power is just 4. So I want to take 4 and I want to raise it to the second power, which is 16. And the negative sign in front means that your answer will be negative. 4 squared is 16, and the negative exponent says take the reciprocal. So you end up with negative 1/16. Now some people prefer the negative is not really associated with the 4. If you were going to rewrite the negative exponent as a positive, it would look like 1/4 squared, and you get negative 1/16 as a value. Now in this last example, this is saying take negative 4 and square it, which is 16, and then the negative exponent says take the reciprocal, so it has a value of 1/16. Now if you wanted to make it a positive exponent, it would be 1/. Now that negative is associated with the 4, so you will keep it with the 4 and square it, so you would end up with positive 1/16. So those are some examples of ways that problems can be written. What if I give you the following problem? What if I told you I had 1/, the opposite of 4 to the negative 2? Now I already read that as the opposite. So the negative is not really associated with the 4, but a positive divided by a negative is a negative, so I know my answer will be negative. Remember in the last, we're using the distributive property when I had x squared over y squared. I said we could move this y up, and that changes the sign of the exponent. I could do the same thing here. You're going to move that 4 up, and it changes the sign of the exponent. But you multiply it by what is there. I multiplied these here. I didn't put a plus there. It's still multiplication. So it's 1 times 4 squared. So the answer becomes negative 16. The negative remains in the problem because a positive divided by a negative is a negative. And then 4 squared is 16. Move it up to the numerator. Negative 1/16. Maybe your problem looks like this. If your problem looks like this, there's different things that you got to be careful of. First of all, I would make note that you have this negative exponent. So that means reciprocal. I want to take the reciprocal. The next thing, I look at negative 4 to the 3rd power. Please do not make this a plus sign right here. It may end up being a positive in the end, but it's not because I can just make this a plus. You have orders of operations say you do parentheses first, then exponents before you multiply or divide. And this is looked at as negative 1 times whatever negative 4 to the negative 3rd power is. So please be careful of that. So the first thing I look at is what is negative 4 to the 3rd. You have 3 negatives. You're taking negative 4 times negative 4 times negative 4. So that gives you a value of negative 4 times 4 is 16 times 4 is 64. So you get negative 64. So the method I look at, once again, is the following. Let me find the correct. So my method is to take the base of negative 4, raise it to the 3rd power, which is negative 64, take the reciprocal, which is 1 over negative 64, but then I have this coefficient here of negative 1. So a negative over a negative, sorry, that moved off to the side. A negative over a negative is a positive. So like I said, it may end up being a positive, but if this were to the 2nd power, then it would be negative. And if you made this into a plus sign right here, you would have an answer as a positive, and it should be negative if that were to a 2, for an example, if it were to an even power. So be careful of that. Maybe by some odd chance they write the problem as the following: 1 over the opposite of negative 4 to the negative 3rd power. So once again, the first thing we want to do is I would calculate just this part right here. So I would say, what is negative 4 to the 3rd power? Negative 4 to the 3rd power is negative 64. This negative exponent says move it up. So I'm going to have negative 64 times 1, which is negative 64. And don't forget, you still have this negative underneath, so you could look at it as a negative 1. And a negative over a negative is a positive, so you would end up with a value of positive 64. And here's your solution. So you really have to be careful with negative signs and how you calculate minus signs and negative signs and dealing with positive and negative exponents. So a lot of different ways to look at this. You could jot it down on a note card if you would like, but please be careful of those calculations. 9 and 10 are like that on your homework assignment. So good luck, and if you have any questions over it, please feel free to send me a message.